When I think of my time with The Witcher 3, I think of venturing the vibrant and beautiful world on the back of Roach. I think of completing compelling quests and getting to know the large cast of wonderful characters. And I think of travelling to every pub I came across just to play a round of Gwent with the local bartender. The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt is undoubtedly the greatest gaming experience I've ever had, and I believe it to be not just the best role-playing game ever made, but the greatest game of all time. In 2015, CD Projekt Red released a game that has expertly refined the formula and foundations to make what could have been a decent open world RPG into an unforgettable one. It is a masterpiece that will stick with me for years to come. I cannot stop praising and recommending The Witcher 3 to all gamers I come across. So what is it exactly that makes Wild Hunt so great? What did CD Projekt Red do in order to set a new standard for modern gaming, and how did they create an all-around near-perfect video game? Today I wanted to celebrate The Witcher 3 and explain why exactly you would be a fool if you failed to experience the game of a lifetime. The storytelling in The Witcher 3 is of a quality I have never before experienced in an open world RPG. It accomplishes something that not even the most widely acclaimed and adored in the genre can. It tells a narrative that is not hindered but able to flourish within its expansive, vibrant and truly alive open world. This is despite the many limitations that an open world structure is known to have on the developer's ability to tell effective and personal narratives with memorable characters. Studios often struggle to balance player freedom in an open world environment and executing a riveting story. Those two goals often conflict, as giving the player the ability to go wherever they want, whenever they want, makes it difficult for a well-paced and structured story to exist in a game of this genre. Wild Hunt is the only game I've ever played that is successfully able to truly conquer this usually inherent problem. The Witcher 3 story at its core is a simple one. You play as Geralt, a monster slayer for hire known as a Witcher, who embarks on a quest to find his adopted daughter Ciri, who has gone missing. This simple goal helps to keep the story focused and clear to the player, especially in the opening hours where the expansive environments and the large number of quests available to you can definitely be overwhelming. However, the true depth of the game's narrative is found in the side quests, which are so good that I feel as though calling them quote unquote side quests is insulting, as well as the characters, the locations, and the deep lore which can be discovered almost everywhere in the world. CD Projekt nailed the execution of not just the main story, but all the quests in the game. While the narrative itself isn't necessarily the best I've seen in a game, it certainly set a new standard for storytelling in an open world. There really isn't anywhere in this area, or really the entire game for that matter, where it is clear the developers got lazy. It is always obvious that such great care was put into every interaction, big or small. The writing throughout is always so well done. I found myself consistently selecting every dialogue option possible during every conversation because the dialogue was just so enjoyable to listen to. I particularly love a certain side quest for this very reason. In it, Geralt is sent to retrieve an old man's goat, and it is clear the game is very much self-aware of how most gamers are feeling about performing such a ridiculous errand.
Can't seriously think I'm gonna chase down your goat.
While on the surface Geralt may seem a bland and dull protagonist, he really does have a lot of depth to him. Being someone who hadn't played the earlier games in the series, or read the books for that matter, that was something I didn't know before jumping into Wild Hunt. I was skeptical about his potential as a character at first, but by the end I grew to truly know and care for Geralt. But Geralt is far from the only memorable character. The vast cast of characters in the game are for the most part so likeable. From the charming mentor figure Vesemir to your absolutely badass adopted daughter Ciri, each character gets their time to shine and have the opportunity to leave a lasting impression on your experience. There are so many, I wouldn't dare to attempt to list them all, but trust me when I say that CD Projekt Red is somehow able to get you to care in some form for each of them. This is especially impressive since I had never had any prior experience with any of the characters in this world before playing for the first time. So even though Wild Hunt is obviously the third game in the franchise, don't let that stop you from jumping in. In regards to gameplay, I can recognise that the combat is probably the weakest element of The Witcher 3. That's not to say it is bad at all, but comparative to the rest of the experience, I can understand why some people find it to be not up to the same standard as the rest of the game. If I were to quantify it, in my opinion, the combat is something like a 9 out of 10, when almost all other elements of the game are a 10 out of 10. With that being said, I still absolutely love the game's combat. The major criticism that I see regarding it is that Geralt has very little weight to his movements, and that it's quite repetitive. Both are sentiments that I don't entirely disagree with. Geralt certainly feels floaty to play, and once you know what you're doing and have mastered the different systems, such as sign usage, quick and strong attacks, and exploiting enemy weaknesses, the combat does become somewhat easy and possibly repetitive, at least on the normal difficulty. However, these things honestly never bothered me or hindered my gameplay experience in the slightest. As a matter of fact, I think the combat is superior to most other open world games on the market. During my close to 100 hours with the base game, not once did I get bored with it. It was always fun, even when it eventually started to become a little mindless for me in the late game. To be honest, the only aspect of the game that I believe is somewhat objectively flawed are the controls and how it feels to move Geralt. As a console player, I found the movement mechanics to be rather inaccurate and lacking in precision. The same thing applies when riding Roach around the world, as I was often getting stuck on aspects of the environment, especially in populated areas such as villages. At the end of the day, the game just doesn't often feel quite right to play. But the way in which the crafting and alchemy systems, on the other hand, complement the core combat mechanics was something I always appreciated. In order to defeat certain monsters you come across, you have to craft and apply certain oils to your sword, for example. This need for preparation before heading into battle makes these encounters immensely satisfying. The sword combat is relatively simplistic on the surface, consisting almost solely of heavy and quick attacks like I said earlier, and parrying enemy strikes. But some upgrades you can get later in the game help to diversify it a little. However, it is when you are fighting monsters and bandits using sword, signs, alchemy skills and crossbow simultaneously that the gameplay shines most. While you can choose certain builds for your character like in most role-playing games, I found that combat is by far more fun and satisfying when you utilise everything at your disposal, even if you haven't invested many, if any, skill points into other areas. Plus, the collectible strategy card game Gwent is a mini-game that is far more enjoyable than it has any right to be. Around 30 hours into my playthrough, I decided to give it a shot and found it to be so fun that I was motivated to face every NPC I came across, even travelling back to locations I'd visited hours earlier in order to expand my collection. The beauty of Gwent is its core simplicity. It may appear complex to a beginner perhaps, but the objective is really simple. Have a higher total tally at the end of the round than your opponent. It's an absolute blast, and for anyone who may be planning to start The Witcher 3, it is definitely worth at least trying out. You may be surprised just like I was. In my mind, The Witcher 3's most impressive feat is its open world. I would actually go as far as to say that CD Projekt Red have created the greatest open world in any video game. It is huge and expansive in scope, but unlike in most other open world games where the landmass is filled with uninspired and meaningless and repetitive tasks to complete, I actually felt compelled to fully explore Wild Hunt's map to the best of my ability. The game world is divided into 5 regions. The 2 major areas, the Isles of Skellige and the war-torn Velen, are larger than most open world games on the market individually. But it's not merely their size that's impressive, as a huge, empty open world is joyless to explore. It's the exceptional quality of the content present in the enormous landmass that makes The Witcher 3's map the benchmark for all open world games. Obviously, the game is just stunning, and it still looks great 4 years after release. The wilderness is always spectacular and displays the truly beautiful aspects of Wild Hunt. From the dense forests, to the expansive fields, to the snowy mountains and the open oceans, the environments are what best demonstrate The Witcher 3's true beauty. But it is actually at times the map's ugly nature, which highlights how gritty and in some cases dreadful it can be, that makes the world special. For every pretty sunset, there is a battlefield occupied by the rotting remains of hundreds of soldiers. For every gorgeous vista, there is a decaying corpse hung by the side of the road. The world is stunning, yet maintains this gritty and lived-in aesthetic. Throughout the game you come across a large variety of locations, each with distinctive architecture. Novigrad is the game's largest city and is complete with slums, marketplaces, ports and all other districts that are to be expected in a real civilization. But above it all towers the great temple of the Eternal Fire, representing the power that organisation holds over this world. These distinctive areas within Novigrad blend together seamlessly to form an in-game city like no other. Every village, of which there are many, feels unique, but each still display a consistent depiction of how past events and the population impact the land. One of depression, poverty, and desperation in the case of Velen, and one of hope and loyalty with Skellige. Perhaps the best compliment I can give to The Witcher 3's map is that it can be described in one word: alive. It feels lived in, like the world and NPCs that populate it existed before the player arrived and will remain long after you leave. The world does not revolve around the player and your actions, which is a trap that I find many other RPGs fall into. Instead, Geralt impacts the regions he visits in subtle but not insignificant ways. Completing a certain quest may make the occupants of a village look at you in a certain way, but at the end of the day they will continue to go about their daily lives and routines. To the villagers, you were just another traveller passing through, and instead of your choices in this side content having some crazy butterfly effect on the game's overall story and ending, they simply impact on the lives of the NPCs that populate that area. This approach is, in my opinion, incredibly impactful on the player's experience with the game, as you witness the consequences your actions have on the individuals involved directly. The world itself has seemingly infinite character. Every location is unique, and each region tells its own story. Velen, for example, tells the story of a land devastated by war, filled with unending poverty. It showcases the perspective of all of the conflict, from the lords to the soldiers, the rich to the poor, the scholars to the peasants. The sheer amount of culture you encounter everywhere adds a sense of realism that has never been accomplished to the same level in the video game industry. As you traverse, everything from the faiths worshipped to the language practiced in conversation by the characters populating the world will adjust and change in a way that feels organic instead of it just feeling like a result of the game's code, despite that obviously being the reality of the situation. CD Projekt Red successfully made me forget that everything occurring on screen is only happening because it is designed in a specific way. I will never really be able to describe how the developers were able to make an open world in a game that is this immersive. There are always points of interest craving your attention on the game's map, and the game is clever enough to respect the player's time, mostly rewarding you for your curiosity. Whether it be with a side quest or some equipment. Everything is a joy to explore, so much so in fact that in the late game for me, there was a lot less incentive to explore the world because I already had access to decent gear. Yet, I completed every side quest in the game and continued to travel the map, simply because I wanted to. I wanted to discover every nook and cranny of The Witcher 3's world, not because of any particular incentive, but because it was genuinely enjoyable, which for me is something an open world game has never done before. And don't even get me started on the game's music. Wild Hunt's lead composer, whose name I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce, created such an unforgettable soundtrack that will stick with me for years. I am by no means any kind of expert on music, but The Witcher 3's score is everything any good soundtrack should be. It can be super fast paced when it needs to be during gameplay, while also having truly powerful and emotional tracks in important story moments. But honestly, it's the music that plays when traversing the world that I adore the most. They're so good in fact that I'm more than happy to listen to them constantly playing on loop as they do in menus. The way in which the ambient and combat tracks adapt dynamically to your specific location in the world adds even further character to the different areas across the multiple maps. Compared to other AAA titles in the genre that have come along since release, The Witcher 3 is untouchable in the music department. Wild Hunt's world and the content within it overall, above all else, is what makes The Witcher 3 a must-play game. Sure, the story, combat and other RPG systems are truly fantastic, but if CD Projekt Red had once again chosen to take a linear approach with the game, as they did with The Witcher 1 and 2, there is no doubt in my mind that the final product would have been decent, but most likely forgettable. At the end of the day, it is the stellar open world that is the most important component of The Witcher 3. The Witcher 3 is a special game to me, so special in fact that I am yet to complete the game's meaty expansions simply because I wish to delay the inevitable reality where there is no longer any new content on offer in the game for me to play. There are only so many ways I can repeat not only what I have said so many times within this very video, but what many others who also admire this game and CD Projekt Red have said. And I've seemingly reiterated the same points so many times because they are so true. The final installment in the Witcher series, at least for now, is truly an incredible achievement, and with it CD Projekt Red proved that they are on another level when it comes to creating an open world and providing players with a remarkable single player story and experience. If you are yet to play The Witcher 3 and are a fan of Western open world RPGs, or just games in general for that matter, trust me when I say you will not regret diving into the pinnacle of modern games.
Many thanks to you, Geralt. I don't believe this city, so.